Yours.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Amy. As Brian said, I've been around here for a while, ever since I went to CU. I came from the Midwest out here to go to school because I wanted to ski a lot. And that's what you can do when you go to CU. You can stack your schedule, and you can try and get up as much as you can. I think in some of my years at CU, I probably went skiing more times in one year than I have in the past few years combined. Life changes after college, I guess. But one time, I went up with some friends, and we're headed up on the chairlift, and Buddy looks at me and he goes, "I dare you to take that sign." And he points to one of those signs that kind of runs down the middle of a run, and it said, "Ski fast, lose pass." It's pretty big. And we joked about it. Oh, yeah, funny. Went on with the day. Well, later, it's the last run of the day. Nobody's out. And I'm coming down, and I see that sign, and that dumb voice that sometimes comes up in my head said, "Take it." You know, like that voice where it's like, yes. And so I go over to it. I start to undo it. I start trying to fold it. It's really stiff mesh material. I'm looking around, making sure nobody can see, shoving it in my backpack, when all of a sudden I hear the roar of a snowmobile coming up the run, and it's a ski patroller. My hand is deep in my backpack, standing there. We make eye contact, and he knows exactly what I'm doing. I have no excuse. So he has me come to the main office where the head ski patrol guy just reams me out that if somebody got hurt that year, it was my fault because they wouldn't know how to slow down and all this. He wants to make an example out of me because other signs have been stolen. And so he calls the sheriff, who then writes me up a ticket, gives me a court date, and also made it this big deal. I was so embarrassed, so kind of frustrated with myself that I had done yet another impulsive, stupid move. So I told my friends, please, let's just, forget about it. They think it's hilarious, but I'm really trying to downplay it. Like, guys, come on, seriously, this was stupid, whatever. Well, about a week goes by, and I'm doing an internship here at Cornerstone, and I get a call from a former associate pastor here, and he wants to know if there was an incident that happened at Copper Mountain. It was such a parental move, if there was an incident. I was immediately I went from being oh no, to who told you? I just wanted to know who had told him because I wanted to, put the blame somewhere else. He said, "Don't worry about it, just tell me what happened." So I told him the story. I said it was so stupid and, how I was mad at myself, and he was super gracious about it. But I still wanted to know how he had found out. So he told me. He said, well, one of the elders, Brian Yost, still around, happened to have read it in the Summit Daily News. It was posted in the blotter of the Summit Daily News. This girl stealing banner for her dorm room, blah, blah, blah. And he happened to recognize my name and said, "I think I know that girl." Yes, he did know me. And so that's how it found out. It's come to be. Gene has held that story over my head for years and threatened to blackmail me with it and out me. But I'm owning it right here, right now. You know that this is in my past. It's on my record. It's before you all. So I tell you that story because it's a little, scandalous piece of my past. But today we're going to be talking about someone else who has a scandalous past. As Brian said, we're going to be talking about the character Rahab in our character series. She's a woman with a reputation, but she can teach us some modern lessons. We know that she's a pretty important woman because she's mentioned in Hebrews 11, and she's one of only 2 women mentioned there. And she's right alongside some of the fathers of our faith, like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So we know that she has this unique role. And what I love about this story is that it shows us that God can reveal himself wherever, whenever, and to whomever. In the places that we would doubt most, where we think there's no potential, God gives us faith. So here's how this is going to happen. I want to start off by giving us some context of what's going on leading up to the story. I want to tell you the story of Rahab, and then I want to extract a few things that we can learn from her. So leading up to Rahab, here's what's going on. The Israelites, they have been established as a people group for a couple hundred years. And then they've been in slavery in Egypt for about 400 years when Moses leads a revolution, this exile, and he takes them to this promised land where they attempt to conquer it. But they don't follow God's plan, so they fail. And they're left wandering the desert for 40 years. They're Bedouins, they're in tent villages, they're waiting for the green light to reattack. It would kind of be like the size of Denver. There's maybe 2 million of them, 1 to 2 million, roaming around northern Colorado. So they're going to attract some attention. Well, they start to make a move. They start to come in. They move about 10 miles across the Jordan River from Jericho. So they're pretty close. Jericho realizes this, and things get tense. But they're a city, Jericho is, with fortified walls. They've got big walls built all around it, surrounding it. So they're safe in some sense, but they know that the Israelites are on the move. So things are kind of heated up, and they know the history of the Israelites because stories have circulated about them. They've been talked about for years, about this warring nation that's out there and who they are and why they're surviving all of these years. So we're in Joshua chapter 2 today, and that's the context of Joshua, who Aaron spoke on a few weeks ago. They've attacked once, 40 years in the desert, and they're about to attack again. They're poised to enter. So all of a sudden, we have 2 spies who are sent into Jericho. The Israelites decide they need to check things out, see what's kind of going on, what the state of the city is. So they send in 2 spies. And they end up at the home of a prostitute named Rahab. We don't know why exactly these guys end up there. We could speculate. They've been out in the desert for 40 years. Maybe they're being impulsive men, and just kind of first thing that's, they go to. Or maybe it's because her home, Rahab's home, is actually built as part of one of the city walls. It's an inn. And back then, an inn was kind of like a combination of a tavern and a hostel. And so it would be the perfect place for these spies to go to get a sense of the city, to hear some gossip, to kind of know what's going on. And it's on the outer walls of the city. So it's easy access. But all of a sudden, these spies are sniffed out. Word gets out that they're in town, that they're around Jericho, and that they're at the home of Rahab. And so she has to make the decision of a lifetime. She decides to hide them on her roof under some flax. And when the army comes asking where they are, she lies to them and says she has nothing to do with them. So the army goes off into the hills looking for them, and she helps them escape by using a scarlet cord out of her window to lower them down. But in exchange for helping them out, for getting them free, she asks them to make an agreement that when the Israelites invade, that they would save her and her family, that they would make this pact, that they would be rescued. And so the 2 spies, they say, yes, we'll do this. And the way that we'll know that this is your home is by the scarlet cord hanging from the window. That's what will mark your household. Now, what I love about this story is that it's this little, interesting story that's tucked away in the middle of the context of this larger takeover of Jericho that the Israelites are about to do, which is in the context of larger Jewish history, which is littered with examples of God doing the impossible all the time. It's the kind of story that blows away our categories of who exactly has faith. There's a lot we can talk about when it comes to Rahab, but what I want to focus on here today is the character of her faith. Rahab is an example that faith overcomes your past. Faith gives you power for the present, and faith directs your future. She shows us those 3 things. So to unpack them, we got to start off by looking at who Rahab was. So I want to tell you a little bit about her. We don't know a ton. It's a very short story. There's not a lot of information. but we do know 3 things right off the bat, that she has 3 big strikes against her. The first one is she's a Canaanite. She's not a Jew. That means she comes from the wrong family. And Canaanites are nasty people. They are mean. They have this huge reputation of doing things like having temple prostitution as part of their fertility cult worship. They're totally perverted. They act out sexually with family members and animals. And they're unethical in the way that they treat each other and the weak. They practice child sacrifice. In fact, there's been burnt bones of infants and children that have been found under sanctuaries in the town of Gezer, which date back to this time period. So we know that there's no sense of moral order in Jericho. It's a dark and mean place. We might even liken it to Sodom and Gomorrah. Strike number 2. Rahab is a woman. Women in these days didn't have a lot of rights. They were treated like second class, sometimes even like property. So we know that Rahab was oppressed in some ways. She probably didn't have any opportunity for education or a career or the ability to kind of dream and use her gifts. What could a woman have done? She had no prestige, no resources, no skills. So being a woman was a big strike against her. The third thing is that she's a prostitute. We don't know why she's a prostitute. Maybe she didn't have any other options. Or maybe she was doing it to support her family. Or maybe she was told her whole life that all she was good for was the pleasure of men. We don't know why she's in this position, but I can imagine that she would have felt very alone, insignificant, and utterly powerless to do anything. She probably hated her situation. She probably was disgusted with herself and disgusted with those around her. She was a nobody, and she lived in the shadows. She must have felt like a slave to her past and consequently a slave to her future. But that's where we get our first lesson. Rahab shows us that faith overcomes your past. She didn't let her checkered past or her gender or her uncertainty and doubts or any other excuse get in the way of her faith. She probably had some doubts, some things that were worrying her about making this move, but she might have been waiting for some kind of game-changing opportunity to come before her. She might have been so hopeless that she was just waiting for a moment like this, like a moment we just saw in that video that was played. By grabbing the rope, she was trading in who she was for her future. She used faith to put everything on the line. But how often is this a place where we get hung up, right? We can't get past certain things. We can't get past losses or broken relationships or regrets. These wounds, these things that just seem to haunt us, that end up defining us. You guys, most of you here, probably have not been a prostitute, but here's some things that a lot of us have faced or are currently facing in our life. As many as 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually abused at some point in their childhood. More than 3 million children every year witness domestic violence in their home. In the U.S., we have a divorce every 13 seconds. 43% of children in the U.S. are going to grow up without a father. Approximately 7.5% of the population suffer from alcohol abuse or alcoholism. And about half of people in the U.S. have a close family member who struggle with alcohol. 1 in 10 of us suffer from depression, and nearly 1 in 5 of us suffer from some kind of anxiety disorder, like obsessive compulsive or panic attacks or post-traumatic stress, things like that. Maybe it's one of those things. Maybe it's several of them. Maybe it's none of them and it's something else. But we all have things that can hold us back, that can keep us from moving forward, and they resurface in ways that are so unhealthy and destructive. It's stuff that shows up when we start blaming other people all the time, or we don't know how to recognize our emotions. We just kind of stuff them. Or we don't know how to set boundaries in our life, or we keep getting sucked into the same cycles, these same habits and patterns over and over again. And sometimes we even become addicted to our pain. It's what we operate out of. It's all we know. A student of mine, she has a really difficult past. She has things like divorce in her family, addiction, abuse, and all kinds of things that make it really hard. Her life has not been easy. But I'm so proud of her because she is making the steps to move forward, to allow faith to heal these wounds. She's getting help along the way. She's not doing it alone. She's in a life group, getting mentored. She's doing counseling right now. She's reading books to help learn about herself, and she's meditating on Scripture. But she's doing the hard work so that her past doesn't hold her hostage. Some of you guys have experienced some dark stuff in your life. But if you feel like you're ready to move forward, if you want help, here at Cornerstone, we want to be a part of that. That's why we offer things like Thrive. Brian mentioned it. It's happening second service. It's a group that helps break patterns, helps you come alongside each other. We offer things like life groups. We want to cultivate rich relationships here that are authentic, where you can be real, you can have accountability. We do things like we offer counseling. We have a counselor here on staff, Mary Howard. And we encourage leaders to read books like Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a theme that comes up a lot. We don't want your past to define you. I have no doubt that this student of mine, she is going to become a stronger person because of the work that she's doing. And it's not just one of those things that she's doing, or even all of them together. It's something more than just a good mentor or a good self-help book. Faith has to transform your past. It has to work its way down into your very core. If you look at this illustration here behind me, you can see some of the different layers we have as people. We've got personalities and emotions and needs. We've got our self-esteem. We have expectations. And at the very bottom, we have our past. But a lot of times, as we kind of work our way down these things, we find reasons to stop digging. We kind of leave it and we say, oh, you know what? It's just my personality. It's just my temperament. It's how I'm wired, right? We say, oh, if I can just learn how to manage my emotions better, then I'll feel like I'm in control. If I just know what my needs and my interests are, then I'll find happiness. If I can work on my self-esteem, then I'll feel successful. If I can find those expectations down there, hidden underneath everything, then I won't be so disappointed. But so often, we don't want to go to that last one. We don't really want to look at our past. But I would argue that faith needs to work its way into each of these areas, and that it needs to start from the bottom up. Faith is a healing process. It's a process. It is just a beginning. It's not going to take care of everything in an instant. But we hope that you guys start to take those steps if you haven't already. This is what faith does for us. It opens up the pathways to forgiveness, to ourselves and to others. It allows us to put down that facade that we have everything in control, and it meets our deepest longings. Part of Rahab's story was her experiencing the loving forgiveness of God. She was set free, in a sense. She experienced this liberation. And for someone like Rahab, who is trapped by her past, by her situation, that freedom, it wasn't just a spiritual freedom. It was also physical and emotional. It was all of those things combined. Rahab experienced freedom because of her faith. and because she allowed it to overcome her past. Faith also gives us power for the present. It gives us the power to act, the ability to dream, to look at our life and see something bigger. For the first time, probably ever, Rahab had a vision for her future. She was given a new identity. She had a new purpose in her life and a new hope. And this was so compelling that she was willing to take a risk. For Rahab, she used God's power in the present to take a risky move, right? She had to hide those spies and lie to the army. She had to hang that cord from her window and leave it there, and she had to wait for the spies to return. She had some big risks that she took. In doing those things, she risked her safety. If she were found out, she would have been killed immediately, no question. Treason, she's helping the enemy. She also was risking her security, everything she had known. She was going to trade in to now move in to be part of the Jewish culture. She didn't know what that would look like, so she was trading in everything that was comfortable. And she also risked her future. What if the Israelites mistreated her just as her people had? What if she didn't like what the Israelites were offering her? What if she still didn't have other options with them? She didn't know what it would look like, but she was trading that in. She was risking it all. Faith gave Rahab the power to act, to do something. We see in James 2:25, it says, "And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead." Faith feels like risk. Faith makes us step into the unknown, into things that seem too big, require too much. That's what faith does for us. For me, it's standing up here on stage. This is a big deal for me. This really stretches me. This isn't comfortable. I don't like it a whole lot. But it's a way for me to practice this very principle, that God can give me power in the present, in this very moment as I stand here. And I've come to kind of like this sense of faith, this sense of risk. It's a little bit better than the sign-stealing kind, where you might get in trouble. This has a little bit more for it, and I'm able to rely on something so much bigger than myself. Maybe you're someone who needs to experience this kind of risk, this kind of faith. Maybe you're someone who needs to step out into the unknown. Most of us, we're not going to face an invading army like Rahab did. But we do face things in our life that seem insurmountable, things that seem way too big for us to handle. It's like that scene from Indiana Jones. Do you guys remember it? It's at the very end. They've been searching for the Holy Grail. Indiana's father has just been shot, so the scene kind of takes on this new intensity. And he has to follow this ancient book that's going to guide him through some obstacles so that he can get to the Grail. And one of them is what's called the leap of faith. He gets to this big, huge cavern, this big abyss. There's no way across it. It seems impossible that he's stuck. And he realizes what's being asked of him, that it's a leap of faith. And so he lifts his foot, he takes all of his courage, and he reaches out into the air, and he steps forward, and he lands on a bridge that appears before him. And he's able to walk across it and to get to the Grail and to help his father. But what we see from this is that Indiana, he would not have taken that risk if he didn't have that motivation before him, if he didn't know that the Grail had healing power that would help him and help his father. He wouldn't have risked stepping in to that cavern. We need the motivation before us. We need something to look out for, to reach out for, and that's what the gospel does for us. The gospel offers us hope. It offers us a lifeline, a bridge It offers us something to step onto. And it's not the other way around. You don't have to do certain things. You don't have to get your life together and kind of have X, Y, Z lined out. And then things will pan out. You don't have to take that risk to then find hope. The gospel, it works the other way around. God gives us hope and promises our future. And that's what gives us the motivation that we need. God makes the first move. We just have to respond. What we're seeing in Rahab's story is the gospel played out. She's seeing her future, something that she can step into, something that she never thought she could have. And that's what's helping her make some bold risks. That student of mine, she's trusting that there's something on the other side. That if she lets go of certain things and if she steps into certain things, that she's going to experience life to the full, life that's promised her. And she's already experiencing some of that fruit. The gospel works the other way around. It gives us power for the present to take that risk. There's a few things that I love about Rahab. I love, first off, that she's a woman, and she's kind of this rebellious woman. She's kind of feisty. I like that a lot about her. I like that she's a prostitute, because it actually kind of makes me feel better about myself, because I'm, just this thief, this sign stealer. And I like that she's a hero, even though in the grand scheme of things, she doesn't have that big of a role to play. But the coolest part of the story is that it doesn't just end here. It doesn't just end in Joshua chapter 2. God doesn't just save her from destruction. He calls her into the family of faith, and he gives her a life and a legacy. And that's the third thing that we can take away from Rahab, is that faith directs your future. Faith gives us the steps, the things we need to do in order to know where we're going. It isn't just this one-time decision, this one-time thing. Faith keeps us tethered in. Faith asks us to keep choosing God along the way. And by doing so, it builds us a legacy. To Rahab, that cord was an outward sign of what God was going to do for her in the future. That scarlet cord, that blood-red cord, is what marked her household. The cord was the escape route, not only for her and the spies, but for them in a spiritual sense. It's what they used to save them. And it's what gave them freedom. It's what directed their future. But Rahab's faith, it wasn't in the cord itself. It wasn't in the physical thing. Rahab's faith was in God, and that God was going to do what he said he's going to do, and that he is who he says he is. That's what faith is. It trusts that God is those things, that God can be those things for us. She was living out the words that the prophet Isaiah would say years and years later. He says, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and I will not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation." Rahab continues to trust that God could direct her future. She ends up assimilating into Jewish culture. She's rescued. Things pan out just as she had hoped. They rescue her. She becomes part of Jewish culture, and she goes on to have a son. But not just any son. She goes on to have a son who protects and cares for a foreign girl named Ruth. We heard about her a few weeks ago when Brian spoke about Boaz. That is who Rahab's son is. And some say that Boaz needed a mother like Rahab, someone who had experienced what it's like to be an outsider, in order for himself to protect and take in a foreigner himself. And from Boaz and Ruth, down the line, we get the great King David. And generations later comes Jesus. From Rahab to Jesus. It's an amazing story of who is in Jesus' past. Rahab is this girl with no prestige, no potential, and yet she's part of Jesus' story. She gives us hope. She had no idea that her life could have this kind of legacy, but she let faith direct her future. That scarlet cord that Rahab throws out her window runs straight to Jesus, our hope incarnate. And you know what's so cool is that word in Hebrew, the word cord, tikva, it actually is the same Hebrew word that means hope. They're the exact same. Hope is a straight line to Jesus. It's Jesus who does for us what the cord did for the spies and her family, Rahab's family. It's Jesus who we have to hang on to when things seem desperate. It's Jesus who rescues and saves. It's Jesus who is ha-tikva, the hope. In Matthew, it says, and his name will be the hope of the world. Sitting here today, you might feel like one of the Israelites, just wandering around, not sure where life is going, not sure what God is doing. Or you might feel like you're on the edge of your seat, ready to take some bold risk like Rahab. But wherever you're at, I hope that you put your trust, your faith, in our hope, Jesus. May he be the one who overcomes your past, who helps you deal with your faith, who helps you overcome your fears and doubts. May he be the one who gives you power for the present, to give you the courage and the strength to do the things that you need to do. And may he be the one to help direct your future, to help give you the steps and be with you along the way. We're going to sing one more song here, and what you'll see is that these are God's words over us. And I promise you that life with God is way more exciting than life without him.